3 weeks ago, in the empty house I grew up in, I pried up a loose floorboard in my old bedroom and found an envelope. My mother's handwriting on the front. A 6-cent stamp, never canceled. It was addressed to me at a rooming house in California where I lived for exactly 4 months in the fall of 1969. My mother has been gone for 28 years. I sat down on the floor of that bedroom, a man of 75, and I read the letter she never sent. And by the second paragraph, I understood that nearly everything I had believed about my family for 57 years, and a fair piece of what I believed about my own life, had been wrong the whole time. I've been telling stories on this porch a while now, friend, and I'll tell you, this is the one my hands still shake on. So settle in close tonight. My name is Charlie. I'm 75 years old. I spent 50 years in Bakersfield, California, fixing guitars for a living, and this is a story about a letter that waited under a floorboard longer than most marriages last, and about the two kinds of love in this world. The kind that speaks up, and the kind that leaves a light on. To make sense of the letter, you have to come back with me to 1969, to a white frame house on Chestnut Street, in a town in Illinois I won't name because it could be any of them, 2 blocks from a hardware store with our name on the sign. Holly's Hardware. My grandfather founded it, my father ran it, and it was understood, the way gravity is understood, that my brother Dean and I would run it after him. Nobody ever asked us. You don't ask gravity. My father's name was Vernon, and I want to be careful with him tonight, more careful than I managed to be for most of my life. He was a big, quiet man, hands like coal shovels, and he ran that store 6 days a week with a pencil behind his ear and a straightedge for a spine. Fair to every customer, hard on every invoice, and silent at home the way a closed door is silent. I don't remember him ever once saying he was proud of me, or angry at me, or anything at me. Sentences at our supper table went through my mother, the way calls used to go through an operator. My mother's name was Peg, and she was the operator, all right. Margaret on her christening record, Peg to the whole county. She sang alto in the church choir and kept a garden of peonies that people slowed down for, and she had a way of standing in a doorway with a dish towel in her hands that I can see this minute, clearer than I can see my own hand. Everything soft that happened in that house happened through her, and everything hard that happened she stood in the doorway for. Remember the doorway, friend. The doorway is where the whole story turns. And me? Well, there was a Silvertone guitar in the Sears catalog in 1962, and I mowed lawns for it, and after that, gravity never had quite the same hold on me again. By 17, I was playing dances across 3 counties with a band called the Midnight Ramblers, and the arguments with my father had settled into a routine. Him at the register pointing out that music wasn't a living, me in the stockroom, sorting bin bolts and dreaming in the key of G. This was 1969, remember. Out in Bakersfield, Buck Owens and Merle Haggard had built a whole sound out of Telecasters and truck stop heartbreak, and every young picker in America with a radio knew that town's name the way pilgrims know a shrine. And I'll tell you a thing about that Silvertone that I didn't let myself remember for years, because it didn't fit the story I'd decided to carry. My mother never once told me to put it down. My father heard practicing as noise interrupting inventory, but my mother, when he was at the store, would leave the kitchen radio off, and I understand now that was so she could hear me through the floor. And some evenings when I'd worked out a song proper, she'd come stand in my doorway with the dish towel, that same doorway, and say, again, the slow one, and I'd play it, and my mother would sing the harmony line, alto, quiet, looking out the window like she was reading it off the sky somewhere over the store. She knew harmonies to songs that came out that same spring, friend. I never asked how. Choir doesn't teach you the Everly Brothers. There was a whole woman in that doorway I only ever saw the apron of, and she sang with me maybe 100 evenings of my life, and we never once spoke of it at supper, and I have spent 50 years in the music trade because gravity never had a chance against that. And that summer, our steel player's cousin, who ran a club out there, sent word. "Come west," he said. "Bands are working 7 nights a week. Bring the kid who plays like his hands are on fire." I was 19. I had $80 saved, a hardshell case held shut with a belt, and a bus ticket for the 14th of September. I carried that bus ticket in my shirt pocket for a week before I found the nerve, and it burned there like a coal the whole time. I'd rehearsed a speech in the stockroom, a good one, about opportunity and the club wage and how I'd send money home, reasonable as a loan application. And all week the house conspired to make it impossible. Monday, Dad had me rehang the store awning with him, 2 hours on ladders, closer to easy than we'd been in a year, and I couldn't do it to the ladder. Tuesday, Mom made chicken and dumplings my meal, like she'd smelled something coming, and I couldn't do it to the dumplings. By Thursday supper, the coal had burned clean through the pocket, friend, and there was no speech left. There never is by the time we finally talk in that family. The blow-up came at supper 4 days before I left. Janet was there, 21, and Dean, 16, and they both went still as rabbits when I said it, because I did it badly, the way 19 does everything, too loud, too proud, leading with the part about quitting the store. And my father set down his fork, and for once in his life the sentence didn't root through my mother. He looked straight at me and he said, "If you get on that bus, don't write. Don't call collect. This house runs on people who stay, and if you can't be one of them, then go be whatever it is you're going to be, but do it all the way." And then he picked his fork back up, and that was the longest speech my father ever gave me. And my mother stood in the kitchen doorway with the dish towel in her hands and said nothing. Friend, I want you to hold that, because for 57 years that was the wound, not my father's speech. His speech in a terrible way I could respect. It had a shape. You knew where the walls were. What I carried down the aisle of that Greyhound, what I carried through every cheap room and every long night for half a century, was my mother in that doorway, saying nothing. The woman who spoke for everybody in that house struck silent when it was my turn. I decided, somewhere west of the Mississippi, that her silence meant she agreed with him, that her softness had a boundary and I was on the wrong side of it. 19 decides things fast and then spends 60 years paying the note. The morning I left, nobody drove me. I walked to the depot with the case in one hand and a duffel my mother had packed on my bed, army surplus, my clean shirts folded in it with tissue paper like they were going somewhere better than a bus. I looked for her at the depot, I'll admit that now. Stood in line looking over my shoulder, watching the corner by the feed store. She didn't come. My father's truck didn't come. The bus pulled out at 7:40 in the morning past the water tower with our town's name on it, and I did not come back, except in ways that hardly count, for a very long time. Now Bakersfield. I could do a whole evening on Bakersfield, and maybe someday I will. The short of it is, the club work was real, 7 nights of it, and the Ramblers lasted 18 months before the drummer got drafted and the singer got married, which are the 2 ways bands died in those days. And I caught on as a session man, second guitar, the fellow you called when the fellow you wanted was on the road. I wasn't ever going to be Buck, friend. I found that out gently over about 5 years, the way you find out most true things about yourself. But somewhere in there I discovered the thing I actually was, which is the man who could fix it. Any of it. A cracked top, a warped neck, a tremolo that wouldn't hold tune. Hands like my father's, it turns out, just aimed at smaller work. I opened a repair shop off Union Avenue in 1977, Holly's Fret and Wire, and for 50 years everybody who broke something they loved in Kern County brought it to me. And I have to tell you about the $200, because it matters more than anything else in this first part. My 3rd month out there, the winter of 69 into 70, I hit the bottom. The club money stalled, the rooming house wanted rent, and I was down to counting change on a chenille bedspread, genuinely counting whether I ate Tuesday or called it a fast. And I picked up the duffel to pack it, because quitting home twice in 1 year is a special kind of shame, and I felt something stiff in the bottom seam. The lining had been unpicked and sewn back, and inside was an envelope, no writing on it, and inside the envelope was $200 in tens and twenties. I stood in that rented room and cried like a child, and then I paid the rent and I ate and I stayed. Bakersfield happened, my whole life happened because of that seam, and here is the part that shames me now. I decided it was Gus, our steel player who'd had a soft heart and a fat wallet, and when Gus denied it, I figured he was being modest, and I bought him beers for the rest of his life whenever he came through, and Gus died in 2011 still denying it, and I still didn't believe him. It never once occurred to me, not one time in 57 years, to think about who packed that duffel. About who was always quick with a needle. You want to know how blind a hurt man can be, friend. He can hold the evidence in his 2 hands, spend it, live on it, build 50 years on it, and never once read the signature. The years went by the way they do. I met Rosa in 1972, at the Blackboard on a Tuesday, which was songwriter night, meaning nobody got paid. She got up with a borrowed guitar and sang an old Carter family thing, and she was flat middling on the guitar, friend. I could hear 3 things wrong with the neck from the bar, but the voice. The voice went through me like the smell of chicken and dumplings. And when she came off I said, "Your guitar's fighting you. Bring it by the shop, no charge." It took me 4 visits to admit there'd never been anything wrong with that guitar a new set of strings didn't fix. It took her 4 visits to admit she knew. We were married in 1974, and for 50 years, any song I started in that house, from any room, she'd land the harmony by the second line, alto, without looking up from what she was doing. I never told her why that undid me every single time. I should have. It's on the list, friend, it's a long list, we'll get there. We raised 2 kids above the shop and then in a proper house, and I was, I hope, I believe, a different kind of father than the one I'd left. Loud about the important things. Home for suppers. And home, I mean my first home, thinned out to a voice on the phone. My mother took to calling on Christmas mornings after my father left for his walk. I understand now that the timing wasn't accidental. 10 minutes, stiff as new denim at first, softer over the years. She'd ask about Rosa and the kids and the weather like a woman reading questions off a card. And at the end, every year, every single year, she'd say the same thing. "Your room's the same, Charlie." And I'd say, "That's a waste of a room, Ma." And she'd laugh a little and not disagree and hang up. One of those calls I have to give you whole. Christmas of 1981. Our second was born that October, a girl, and Rosa and I had settled the name months before, and I'd told nobody back home because Janet had a mouth and I wanted to say it myself. So my mother asks after the baby, reading off her card, and I said, "She's fat and happy, Ma." We named her Margaret. And the line went so quiet I thought we'd lost the connection. Friend, 20 seconds of Illinois winter humming down 2,000 miles of wire. And then my mother said, in a voice I'd never heard her use, not once, "Well now, there's 2 of us." And then faster, patching herself, "That'll confuse the mail," and we talked another minute about nothing, and she got off the phone quicker than usual. Rosa watched me stand there holding the receiver after the click and said, "What did she say?" And I said nothing. She said nothing. And my wife, who was wiser about my family than I ever was from further away, said, "Charlie, one of these days you're going to have to learn the difference between nothing and everything in the quiet people." One of these days I did. It took a floorboard. I went back 4 times in 30 years. My sister Janet's wedding in 72, where my father and I stood at opposite ends of a church basement like 2 magnets turned wrong way round. My mother's 60th. And then her funeral in the spring of 1998, where I stood at the back of the same church, 50 miles of bad road inside me, and watched my father, 80 years old, sit alone in the front pew with his back straight as the day the bus left. The choir sang, her choir and friend, "Here is a cruelty nobody plans." They sang a hymn she'd sung under 100 times, and the alto line just wasn't there. Sopranos carrying on over a hole the exact shape of my mother, and I stood in the back and heard the harmony that was missing, because I was the only other person in that church who'd ever heard her sing it in a doorway, and I could have walked up and filled it. I knew every note. I stood in the back with my hands folded, and I let the whole sing her part, and of everything I regret, and by now you know it's a list, that hymn is high on it. Nobody had to root sentences through anybody anymore. There were no sentences. After the service, he shook my hand at the door like I was a sales rep, said, "Thank you for coming, Charles and friend. I drove 2,000 miles home to California, and I don't remember one single town I passed through." The last time I saw him was 2005, in a hospital, 3 days before the end. Dean called and said, "Come now," and I flew, and I sat by the bed, and my father, who had one speech in him per lifetime, had already given his. He was mostly sleeping. But he woke once in the night while I was there alone with him, and he looked at me a long, long time, longer than he'd looked at me in 40 years, and he said one thing. He said, "Your mother handled all the mail in this house," and went back to sleep. I thought it was the medicine talking, the way a man always thinks it's the medicine when it's actually the message. "Your mother handled all the mail in this house. I filed it under fog and flew home after the funeral, and Dean and I split what there was to split, politely, through lawyers, like strangers with the same last name. He took the store. The house went to Janet, who'd been living in it with Mom's peonies and Dad's silences for years by then, and that suited everybody. Dean and I managed 20 years on one Christmas card apiece. His came signed Dean, no note, in Corinne's handwriting on the envelope, and mine went signed Charlie, no note, in Rosa's, and there's a kind of comedy in that. Two brothers not speaking to each other through their wives' penmanship for 2 decades. It wasn't hatred. I want to be plain about that. Hatred would have taken effort, and effort might have gone somewhere. It was inventory. He had me filed under left, I had him filed under stayed, and both of us thought the filing was the whole man, and we'd have gone to our graves with the drawers shut if a floorboard hadn't squawked. When his boy took over the store in 2019, I heard about it from Janet. When my Rosa died, he sent flowers, real ones, big, and I looked at the card a long time, Corinne's hand again, and I put it in a drawer. Filed. You want to know what pride costs by the pound, friend, weigh a florist's card sometime. And this March, Janet died. 78 in her sleep, a better exit than most of us get. And the house on Chestnut Street came by her will to me and Dean together. And Rosa, my Rosa, I lost her last spring. So when the lawyer's letter came, there was nothing pinning me to Bakersfield but a shop I'd already sold and a house full of quiet. And if there's one thing I know from 50 years of quiet houses, friend, it's that you don't sit in them. So I put my tools in the truck, because a man doesn't travel without his tools even when there's nothing to fix, and I drove east in June, backward down the whole road, 2,000 miles the wrong way up my own life, to empty out my childhood and put a for sale sign in my mother's peonies. Dean met me there with the key. 73 years old, my little brother, still opening the store Saturdays even though his son runs it now. He shook my hand on the porch like a sales rep. It runs in the family, that handshake. We worked out a schedule without quite having a conversation, him weekends, me weekdays, and for 9 days I sorted a house alone. And friend, if you've done it, you know, and if you haven't, I can't fully tell you. Emptying your family's house isn't packing. It's archaeology, except every artifact knows your name. Her choir robe in a garment bag. His store aprons, folded in a drawer, pencil still behind the strap of one. The kitchen table where the speech happened. One chair still worn pale at the arms, his chair. And I sat in it one evening with my coffee and apologized to it. And I'm not sorry I did. And I have to tell you about day 6 because the house dealt its cards in order, friend, like it had a plan. Day 6 was Mom's sewing room, untouched really. Janet had kept it like a chapel. And in the bottom of the sewing box, under the pinked scraps and the button tins, I found 3 envelopes, rubber-banded, addressed in a hand I recognized because it was mine. My letters. September, October, November, 1969. Postmarked Bakersfield. Opened neat with a letter knife and worn, friend, worn soft as flannel. The folds gone white the way paper goes when it's been read past counting. I sat in her sewing chair with my own 19-year-old handwriting in my lap, and I could not make it add up. Because the story I'd carried was, I wrote 3 times and nobody answered, so I quit writing. That was a fact I'd built 50 years on. And here were the letters, received, opened, read to rags, and kept in the one box in that house my father wouldn't ever have looked in. Somebody had read my letters half to pieces and never answered a one of them, and I sat there among the button tins asking a dead room the only question that mattered. Why answer me nothing, Ma, if you couldn't put me down? 3 days later, a floorboard answered for her. But I didn't know that yet, and I want you to sit in the not knowing with me a minute, because I've come to believe that's where most families live. Holding the evidence, missing the letter. On the 9th day, I did my old bedroom. Janet had kept it a guest room, but the bones of it were mine. The window over the porch roof I used to climb out of, the closet door that never latched. And I was down on one knee packing books when my eye caught the floorboard by the radiator. 3rd board from the wall. Loose since 1958 when I was 8 and discovered it and made it my treasury. Baseball cards went under there, an arrowhead, a church key I shouldn't have had. Every kid's got a bank, friend, and every man remembers where his was. I hadn't thought about that board in 60 years, and I want to be honest, I almost didn't look. I was tired, my knees were done, the truck was half loaded. But you always look. That's the thing about a treasury. You always look one more time before you close the account. The board came up the way it always came up, with a squawk like a stepped-on cat. And there was the envelope. Not dusty, or not as dusty as 60 years, and I understood later that was because it had only lived under there since 1996. Cream paper gone soft at the corners, the way paper gets when it's been handled a great deal before it was put away. 6-cent stamp, Roosevelt, never canceled. And my mother's hand, that upright Palmer method hand that graded my childhood in birthday cards, addressed to Mr. Charles V. Hollies, at the rooming house on Decatur Street in Bakersfield, California, where I had lived for 4 months, 57 years ago. Vernon, the V is for Vernon. I don't know why that's the detail that buckled me, but I sat down on the floor of my boyhood room like a man whose strings had been cut, and I held it up to the window light, and then I did the thing you're not supposed to do with an artifact, and I don't care. I opened it. 4 pages, both sides, dated November the 12th, 1969. I'm going to give you my mother's letter now. Not every private line of it, some of it belongs to just us, even now, even here. But the heart of it you've earned, riding this far with me, and anyway I've come to believe she'd want it read on a porch, out loud at night, to people who have got their own unsent mail sitting somewhere in a drawer inside them. It began, My Charlie. My Charlie, I was at the depot. I want that to be the first thing you know because I saw you looking, and it has been eating me alive since September. I was parked in the Hendersons' lot behind the feed store, in your Aunt Vi's Rambler, because your father believed I was at the church rummage sorting, and I watched you stand in that line looking over your shoulder, and I gripped that steering wheel so my hands would not open the door, and I watched my boy get on a bus, and I let him believe nobody came. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, and I have buried a mother and 2 babies you never knew about, and I say it again so you'll believe it. Letting you think I wasn't there was the hardest. You'll want to know why. Charlie, your father is not the man you think he is. He is that man, but he is not only that man, and I am going to break a promise now that I have kept for 30 years of marriage, and God can take it up with me directly. In 1938, your father was 19 years old and he played the cornet and he was good, Charlie. Not good for the county. Good. There was a band leader out of Chicago, a real one, whose bus broke down outside town in August, and who heard your father play at the Legion Hall that Saturday and offered him a chair and a wage and a berth on that bus when it rolled out Monday. And Monday morning, your grandfather Hollies, whom you are named for and never met, thank the Lord, took the bus ticket your father had bought with his own cornet money, and he burned it in the kitchen stove, and he said the sentence your father said to you at this table 4 days ago. Word for word, Charlie. This house runs on people who stay. Your father watched that bus roll out from behind the register at the store, where he stood counting nails for 40 more years. The cornet went up the attic. It is up there tonight. He has never once spoken of it to me in 30 years, but Vi was at the Legion Hall in 1938, and Vi doesn't forget. And after supper on Wednesday, when you told him about California, your father sat in the truck in the dark for 2 hours, and I let him believe I didn't see that either. This family is very good at watching its people from parking lots. Charlie, when he said don't write, that was not hate. I need you to hear this while you're young and not figure it out at some graveside when it's spent. Your father was not looking at you when he said it. He was looking at the door he didn't walk through, and it took everything soft left in him not to beg you to stay, and begging you to stay would have been the sin, Charlie, because you'd have done it. You're my soft one, you'd have stayed, and every Saturday for the rest of your life I'd have watched you sort bin bolts with your hands on fire. Him roaring you out that door with his blessing dressed up as banishment is the only way a Hollies man has ever known how to buy his son a ticket. It is a terrible language, and I have lived inside it for 30 years, and I will not let it cost me you the way it cost his father him. So here is what I am telling you, and you mind me now like you're 9. Go all the way, exactly like he said, but skip the part where you believe you weren't loved. You were loved out that door, Charlie. There's a difference, and knowing it is the difference, and most men in this family die not knowing it. The money in the duffel was mine. Egg money, choir money, 31 years of quarters, and don't you dare thank Gus Prout for it. I know how you think. I unpicked that seam Tuesday night while you slept, and I sewed it back before 6, and I am quick with a needle, and I mention it because it is the one piece of vanity I am permitting myself in this letter. When you found it, that was me at the depot after all. I did come. I just came sewn into the lining, which is where mothers mostly ride. Write to me at Vi's. Your father takes the mail first at the house, not to burn anything, Charlie, that's not him, but I'd sooner our letters didn't have to walk past his breakfast. I have your 3 letters from this fall, they came before he was up, and I have read them until the folds have gone soft as cloth, and I answer every one of them out loud in the garden, which the peonies enjoy but does you no good, hence this envelope. Be good to your hands, they're your inheritance, they're his hands, though neither of you will ever believe me. Come home when you're somebody to yourself, not to him. You never had to be anybody to me. You arrived finished. And Charlie, however long it runs, however far, the porch light is on for you. I put it on the first night you were gone, and your father said, "What's that for?" And I said, "Burglars," and he looked at me a moment the way he looks at a bent nail, and he has never asked again. But he checks the bulb, Charlie. I've seen him check it. Make of that what you will. All my love, all of it, mind, don't share it with the band. Mother. And then at the bottom of the last page, in the same hand but a different ink, shakier, and dated April of 1996, 27 years later, 6 lines. Found this in my sewing box today where it has scolded me since Nixon. I was never brave enough to send it, Charlie. First the address went stale, then the years did, and after your father and you went a stone with each other, mailing it started to feel like picking a lock on a door I'd promised him I'd keep shut. I'm moving it to your treasury under the floorboard, third from the wall. Don't think I didn't know about the treasury. I knew about everything. I was your mother. If you are reading this, then you came home one more time and you looked one more time, and it means what I always told you it would mean. The light worked. It just took the long way through the wiring. Love is patient. Yours especially. P.S. The cornet is still in the attic. Do something about that. Friend, I sat on the floor of my boyhood bedroom until the light went out of the window, and I'm not going to perform my crying for you. We don't do that on this porch. I'll tell you the shape of it instead. It wasn't grief, or not first. First, it was 57 years of furniture moving. Every room in my life getting rearranged at once. The depot, rearranged, she came. The silence in the doorway, rearranged. It was a woman standing guard on the only door out, making sure nobody soft slammed it. The $200 rearranged, signed at last. Gus, poor Gus, cleared posthumously. I owe that man an apology I'll have to deliver by other means. My father's don't write, rearranged into the only love sentence he had the vocabulary for, purchased second-hand from his own father's cruelty and passed down at cost. And that hospital sentence, the one I filed under fog. Your mother handled all the mail in this house. He wasn't foggy. My father was 86 years old, 3 days out from the end, doing the bravest thing a Holly's man ever does, pointing at the truth from behind the register. He was telling me, as plain as he could ever say anything, "There's mail, boy, go find the mail." He knew, I'll never prove it and I don't need to. He checked the bulb, friend, make of that what you will. I did one thing before I slept, sitting on the edge of that bed with the letter in my lap. I called my daughter, Margaret in Bakersfield, where it was only 9 o'clock, and she heard my voice and said, "Daddy, what's wrong?" And I said, "Nothing's wrong, honey. For maybe the first time in 57 years, nothing is wrong." And I read her the letter, all of it, both inks straight through. And my daughter was quiet a while, and then she said the thing that children say, that lands like a tuning fork on a bench. She said, "So that's why Grandma Peg went so quiet on the phone that Christmas you told her my name. You always told that story like it was cute, Dad. Dad, nobody in this family has ever once been crying about what they said they were crying about." And then she said, "Come home when you're done, but paint the room first. You know which room. My mother's granddaughter, friend. The mail runs on time in that girl." I stayed in the house that night, first time in 57 years. Slept in my old room, or lay in it anyway, listening to a house I thought I'd hated, hearing all the sentences it never said out loud running through the walls like water finding old pipe. And at some point past midnight I got up and went out to the garage with a flashlight, because a thought had been circling me for an hour and I needed to know. And there it was, friend, on the shelf above the workbench, behind 3 coffee cans of sorted screws, because even a man's secrets get organized in that family. A case of light bulbs. 60-watt, soft white, 11 of them left out of 24, and on the box end, in my father's block printing in grease pencil, it said, "Front porch only." She died in 1998. He lived 7 more years. 11 bulbs gone out of 24, friend, and my mother in the ground. You do the arithmetic on who was climbing that stepladder until 2005 at 86 years old, keeping a promise he officially knew nothing about, in the only handwriting he had. Next morning was a Saturday, so I knew where Dean was. I drove to the store, our names still on the sign, his boys now really, and I walked in at opening, first customer, and my brother looked up from the register with the pencil behind his ear, our father to the life, and started to say something store polite. And I laid the letter on the counter between us, by the nail scale, and I said, "Dean, it's from Mom. You need to read it, and then I need my brother back, and I don't much care in which order." He read it right there, standing up, all 4 pages, both sides, and the ink at the bottom. Took him a long time, or he made it last, I don't know which. There was a customer came in for washers, And my brother, who has never in 50 years made a customer wait, said, "Earl can help you down at the co-op," without looking up. And when he finished, he set it down flat and smoothed it with one hand, exactly the gesture our mother used on tablecloths. And my brother, 73 years old, said, quietly, to the nail scale, "I always thought you got the guts and I got the store. Turns out we both just got Dad from different sides of the register." And then Dean told me his piece. Because there's always another piece, friend, in a family like this, held by whoever stayed. In 1988, he said, the summer after your shop was in that guitar magazine, the one with your hands on the cover, Mom left it on the coffee table for a month where Dad had to walk past it. And one morning in August, Dad says to me, out of a clear sky, "Ride along, I'm looking at a supplier in Fresno." "Dean, there is no hardware supplier in Fresno. There never was. We drove 19 hours, Charlie." He didn't say 4 sentences the whole way. And we get to Bakersfield at the end of the day, and he has me park across the street from Holly's Fret and Wire, engine off. Your door was propped for the heat. You were at the bench with your back to the street, and you had a guitar neck in the vise, and you were working. And through that screen door came the sound of you checking a fret, that one note, over and over, ping, ping, ping. And our father sat in that truck with his hands on his knees and listened to you tune one note for 20 minutes, Charlie. Didn't blink. And then he said, he set up left-handed, "Huh, that's your grandfather." And he started the engine, and we drove 19 hours home. And if you ever tell anyone I saw his face doing what it was doing in that streetlight, I will call you a liar, because I promised myself I would. 2 old men stood in a hardware store and held on to each other over a nail scale, friend, and the customer bell rang twice before we cared. I never put the sign in the peonies. Dean and I sat down that Sunday with coffee at the kitchen table, his chair on one side and mine on the other and nobody's at the head, and we sorted it out in about 10 minutes, the way 60 years of lawyering never could have. The house stays Holly's. His granddaughter Katie is getting married in the fall, a teacher, wants to stay in town, can't touch what houses cost now. And there's a white frame house on Chestnut Street with a garden of peonies and a guest room whose bones are mine, and it needs young noise in it worse than either of us needs the money. We're doing the paperwork this month. I get the summers, that's my rent, a room and a porch, and my brother 2 blocks away, and Bakersfield keeps me the winters my kids are there, my Rosa is there, in the ground with the sun on it, the way she'd want. And the cornet, friend. The cornet was in the attic, exactly where a letter mailed 28 years into the future said it would be, in a case with a 1938 newspaper folded under it. "My hands are my inheritance," she wrote, "they're his hands." Well, they're 75 years old and they've repadded exactly 1 cornet in their life, but there's a 19-year-old in the county youth band now, plays like his hands are on fire, family can't afford an instrument. Dean knows the family from the store, of course he does. Staying has its own kind of reach. Before any boy could play it, though, it needed the bench. 88 years in an attic is hard time, friend, valves frozen, pads gone to dust, a dent in the bell where something had been set on it around, I'd guess, Eisenhower. So I brought my tools in from the truck, set up on the kitchen table where the speech happened, because that felt correct, and I did the work. 3 evenings. And I'll tell you something about repair that 50 years at a bench taught me, and that kitchen table confirmed. The thing fights you at first. Everything seized wants to stay seized, metal or man. It's all the same physics. You don't force it. Penetrating oil, patience, warmth, and the smallest possible movements. A quarter turn a night, until one evening, no different from the 3 before it, the valve that wouldn't move moves. And on the 3rd evening I put new pads in, and I stood in my mother's kitchen at 10 o'clock at night, a guitar man with no business on a brass mouthpiece, and I blew 1 note. 1. Middle C, more or less, wobbling like a newborn calf. And it went up the stairwell and through the rooms and out the screens into the peonies, the first note that Horn had made since 1938, and I swear to you the house took it the way dry ground takes rain. My father heard that note somewhere, friend. I've quit being embarrassed about sentences like that. The evidence in this story runs all one direction. That boy is playing it this fall at the Harvest concert, and Dean and I will be in the third row, and somewhere a man who watched two buses leave without him is going to hear what was in that attic all along. It only took the long way through the wiring. So that's the story. If you take one thing from an old repairman tonight, take this. In every family there is mail that never got sent. Some of it's in sewing boxes and some of it's under floorboards, but most of it, friend, most of it is walking around inside the people at your supper table, stamped, addressed, and never mailed, because sending it means picking the lock on some promise or some pride. If you've got a letter like that in you, and you know right now whether you do, don't leave it for the floorboards. Floorboards are patient, but people aren't granted the same warranty. Say it, mail it, drive the 19 hours. And if somebody once roared you out a door, do an old man a favor before you die certain about what it meant. Check whether anyone was parked behind the feed store. Check who packed the duffel. Check the bulbs in the garage. Because the terrible secret of families like mine, friend, is not that the love wasn't there. It's that it was there the whole time, wearing work clothes, keeping its receipts in coffee cans, watching from parking lots, sewn into lining, screwed into a porch fixture at 86 years old, one stepladder rung at a time. Love that never learned to talk. It's still love, friend. It's just love that needs a repairman. And repair, I can tell you after 50 years at the bench, repair is mostly just patience and the right light to work by. It's evening here now on Chestnut Street, my summer porch. Dean's coming by with sweet corn and Katie wants the guest room painted yellow, and the peonies made it through another June, which my mother would count as the news. The fireflies are starting in the side yard, right on schedule, 57 years of schedule. And the porch light's on, same fixture, I checked the bulb myself. It always is. If this story found you somewhere quiet tonight, stay a while. There's a new one on this porch every week and the light's on for you too. This has been the Porch Light. This story, like all stories told here, is an original work of fiction. Any resemblance to real persons is coincidental. Good night, friend. Drive safe going home.